Our New Testament reading this morning is from the Gospel according to Luke. We're going to be in the 8th chapter, starting with the 26th verse. It goes like this. Jesus and his disciples sailed to the Gerasenes' land, which is across the lake from Galilee. As soon as Jesus got out of the boat, a certain man met him. This man was from the city and was possessed by demons. For a long time he had lived among the tombs, naked and homeless. When he saw Jesus, he shrieked and fell down before him. Then he shouted, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torture me." He said this because Jesus had already commanded the unclean spirits to come out of the man. Many times it had taken possession of him, so he would be bound with leg irons and chains and placed under guard. But the man would break his restraints, and the demon would force him into the wilderness. When Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "Legion," the man replied, because many demons had entered him. They pleaded with him not to order them to go back into the abyss. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the hillside, and the demons begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs. And Jesus gave them permission, and the demons left the man and entered the pigs. And the herd rushed down at the cliff into the lake and drowned. When those who tended the pigs saw what happened, they ran away and told the story in the city and in the countryside. And people came to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone. He was sitting at Jesus' feet, fully dressed and completely sane. And they were filled with awe. Those people who had actually seen what had happened told them how the demon-possessed man had been delivered. And then everyone gathered from the region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave their area because they were overcome with fear. So he got into the boat and he returned across the lake. The man from whom the demons had gone begged to come along with Jesus as one of his disciples. Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return home. Tell the story of what God has done for you." So he went throughout the city and proclaimed what Jesus had done. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This man in our story is known for the rest of history as the Gerasene demoniac. You'll hear his name brought up every once in a while, the Gerasene demoniac, as if like that's his totality of his identity and everything you need to know about him. He's known as the Gerasene demoniac, and he's an interesting story because in Luke's gospel, it comes in a different place in Jesus' ministry. In this version of the story, Luke puts this man's story in between Jesus calming the storm on the lake and right before he heals two women who had incurable diseases. He puts this story in between Jesus calming the chaos, Jesus speaking into the void of the storm, Jesus speaking over the wind and the waves, speaking over the disciples' fear into the storm, and saying, "Peace, be still." We meet then the Gerasene demoniac, and then after the Gerasene demoniac, we meet two women, both who have had lifelong diseases. One of the women suffers from bleeding. She has been bleeding for years. And Jesus heals that. He speaks into what seems the impossible. He speaks over her pain. He speaks into her heart. He does what everybody else said couldn't be done. And he stops her pain. And in the middle of this story, we find this man. Now, he's infamous in town. Everybody knows him. He's the guy who everybody sees walking around in dirty clothes and a long beard. The one everybody knows because they see him all the time limping down the street. And they just know him as the crazy guy. They might even call him Crazy Bob, right? That's just him. He's become a staple and a fixture in their town. And he resists help. He resists the help that probably was offered in the beginning. And people had just become apathetic. They had just become unwilling or unable to do anything to help relieve his situation. Now, in modern times, we modern folks like to name everything. We like to retroactively diagnose things, right? And so you'll often hear people talk about his demons as a mental illness, because clearly he's demonstrating symptoms of schizophrenia. He's demonstrating symptoms of hallucinogenic disorders. He's demonstrating symptoms of, we tend to put these things onto the Bible story. He just is mentally ill. That's all that's going on, and Jesus heals him. And that's fine as far as it goes. But I want to say a couple things about that. One is that we shouldn't put things onto the Bible that aren't there. This story, we should take at its face value. And the reason we don't like to take this story as its face value is that we are very uncomfortable with the idea of real evil. We're okay with the idea of a God who is good. We're on board with that. We're on board with a God who is good. We're good with the supernatural as long as it's a good kind, right? We're comfortable with the God of love, but as soon as you start entering into the idea that there might also be real evil in the world, we get really uncomfortable with that idea. But the Bible tells us that demons were this man's problem. And we should take that at its truth. We should take that at face value. Because one of the things it does is harms folks who have actual mental illness. It doesn't do any good to explain away the demons this man has by naming it something that we can treat with modern medicine. Because what it does is tell people with schizophrenia that they just didn't pray hard enough. That if they prayed harder, they wouldn't need medication, right? And I have seen multiple times folks who say, I shouldn't be this way because if I had enough faith, I wouldn't have, right? If I had enough faith, I wouldn't have cancer. If I had enough faith, I wouldn't have depression. If I had enough faith, then I wouldn't have a job loss situation. And all that does is shift the blame from the person who deserves it, which is the demon, onto the person who was just genetically inclined to bad things, to challenges. It also creates an us and them situation, that there are some people with demons and some people without. And I'm here to tell you that all of us in this room have a demon. And you may have a name for your demon or not, but everybody struggles with something. And it doesn't do us any good to name this man and put our things on him as if the idea that if we just had enough faith or prayed hard enough, we would get rid of those things. Presbyterians have throughout history always acknowledged that there is a God who is good and a real power of evil. And we get uncomfortable with this idea. Every time we talk about predestination, people come up to me and say, but how does God know that some people are destined for heaven and some people are not? And it's because, some people are destined for heaven and some people are not. And that may be uncomfortable for us to deal with. That may cause guilt in our heart. That may make us uncomfortable. But the Bible over and over and over and over again shows us that there is real and powerful evil in the world. I believe that evil is real. I believe that there are people who are evil. I find it really hard to look at somebody like Hitler and say that he did not have real evil in his heart. And now what God does with those folks, I don't know. That's outside of my scope. That's larger than me. That's above my pay grade, what happens to folks from beginning to end of their lives, whether they're redeemed or not, whether they end up in heaven or not. That's beyond what I know. But all you have to do is turn on the news and see that evil exists. That there are demons in this world who need casted out. That there are people and situations to whom only God can speak. And I wish that weren't the case. I wish that we could only talk about the God of good. I wish that we could pretend that everything is rosy and good all the time. But at some point we have to acknowledge that evil is real, that evil exists, and that God calls us to speak into those places. We may never overcome it. In fact, I know we won't. Revelation reminds us that the only way evil will go away is when Jesus comes again. That there will always be wars and rumors of war. Jesus says there will always be the poor among you. That there will always be people who are getting sick. There will always be famine. There will always be these things that break our hearts. The reason Revelation promises that there will be no more weeping in heaven is because our life will always have moments of weeping. It doesn't do us any good to pretend that that's not real. It's part of who we are. The brokenness of humanity. But that is not where God leaves it. God never says that evil has the last word. Jesus spoke to those demons and drove them out of that man into a herd of pigs. And why on earth the pigs ran off the cliff and died, I don't know. But that's maybe to lighten the situation. Maybe to inject a little humor into what's happening. I don't know. But I know that God spoke and the demons listened. I know that God created out of that man a witness more powerful than any other. I know that God turned that man into the one that everybody looked at kind of strange and made him into the strongest witness for the gospel that could have been created. God calls us to speak. God calls us to speak even when our hearts are broken. God calls us to speak even into situations that feel helpless. God calls us to stand and proclaim the good news of the gospel, which is, yes, evil is real, but so is God. Yes, our hearts will break, but God will not let that be the last word. Yes, there will be weeping, but God comes and will make that go away in the fullness of time. When Sandy Hook happened, I was going to a youth conference. And I was sitting in a room full of Christian educators, right? People who worked with children, and we watched the news as it happened. We watched Sandy Hook happen. And this man stood up in the middle of the room and said that Presbyterians are saddened but not surprised when these things happen. We know that the world is gonna always bring us something. But we are called together in a community which lifts each other up and carries our burdens. We know that evil is real, but it does not have the last word. And we know that God calls us to be helpers in those situations where you just need a Band-Aid for the day or a helping hand. And so we can watch the news and have our hearts break. But we can also remember that in the midst of that, God has a job for us to do. And that is to witness to the good news of the gospel, even when it's hard. Join me in prayer. God of this day, God of this world, our heart breaks. And we find ourselves lost in confusion from time to time. We find ourselves bewildered occasionally. We find ourselves feeling helpless. We know that things happen to us that we are not ready for. We know that there will always be a brokenness in this world until you come again. We ask that you speak into those places and heal them, that you cast the demons out from us, and that you prepare us to be the kind of witnesses for the gospel that show other people that there is not a reason to give up hope, that you have good news for the world. We ask that you call us into those places. Give us voices to speak when we need them. Give us feet to walk when it's time. And give us hands to serve so that we can help each other make it through those days. It's in God's name that we pray. Amen.